"I'll have your baby," she said, and the rancher fought for her life. Wild West drama. The sun was just beginning to climb over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The land stretched wide and open, a mixture of dry plains, scattered bushes, and the occasional hardy tree that had learned to survive in the harsh Wild West. Clint Harper sat on the porch of his small wooden ranch house, sipping his morning coffee, watching the first rays of light warm the earth. The wind whispered across the plains, carrying the faint sound of cattle lowing in the distance. This was his life. Long days of work, quiet nights under a vast sky, and the simple satisfaction of knowing that he could take care of himself and his land. Clint was a man of routine. Every morning he walked the fences, checked the cattle, repaired broken boards, and made sure the water troughs were full. Life could be hard, but he liked it. It gave him purpose. Though he was content in many ways, there was a quiet loneliness that clung to him, a shadow he had grown used to over the years. Friends and neighbors were far away, and the few who lived nearby kept to themselves. Still, Clint found peace in the rhythm of ranch life. There was a beauty to it, even in its roughness. That morning, as Clint leaned against the porch railing, he noticed a thin plume of dust rising on the horizon. It was unusual. No one traveled these paths without reason. His hand instinctively went to the revolver at his hip, a habit formed from years of needing to protect himself. Clint squinted against the sunlight, trying to make out what was coming. It wasn't long before he saw the figure. A woman, riding a tired horse, moving slowly and carefully across the plain. She seemed small against the wide sky, her dark hair blowing lightly in the wind. But something about the way she moved told Clint she was struggling, not just physically, but with fear, with urgency. Clint put down his coffee and stepped down from the porch. He watched as she drew closer, and as she did, he noticed something he hadn't expected. The woman's stomach was rounded, showing the unmistakable signs of pregnancy. Her clothes were worn and dusty, and her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had traveled far and faced danger. She was carrying herself with a quiet determination, but there was a tremor in her hands, and every few steps she glanced behind her as if afraid of being followed. Clint hesitated. He wasn't used to visitors. People in these parts tended to keep to themselves, and strangers could bring trouble. Yet there was something about her, something that told him she needed help. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a pull toward her, a sense of responsibility that went beyond simple neighborly courtesy. The woman finally reached the edge of the ranch. Her horse stumbled slightly in the dry soil, and she dismounted, breathing heavily. She looked around, taking in the simple wooden fences, the open fields, and the ranch house in the distance. Then, as if deciding, she lifted her head and walked straight toward the porch where Clint stood. Her boots kicked up small clouds of dust as she approached. "Please," she said, her voice quiet but steady. I need your help. I can't stay out there. I don't have anywhere else to go." Clint studied her. He could see the fear in her eyes, but also the strength. She wasn't weak, far from it, but she was desperate. He wanted to ask questions, to know who she was and why she was here. But the moment felt urgent, immediate. He gestured to the porch. "Come up here. Let's sit a minute." She hesitated, then climbed the steps and sat on the edge of the porch. Clint handed her a cup of water from the pitcher on the railing. She drank it slowly, her hands shaking slightly. When she set the cup down, she looked at him directly. There was a seriousness in her gaze that made Clint uneasy and curious at the same time. "My name is Maggie Lawson," she said. I don't have anyone left, and I'm gonna have a baby. I need a place to stay, at least for a little while, until I can figure things out." Clint felt the words settle in the air. He wasn't used to strangers arriving with such boldness. Yet Maggie wasn't asking for charity, and she wasn't weak or begging. She was stating a fact, something she needed, and she was willing to trust him with it. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "You can stay. For a while. But you need to know, this is a hard place. Life out here isn't easy." Maggie nodded, her relief almost visible in her expression. "I don't mind. I just need somewhere safe. Somewhere I can survive. Clint looked at her, trying to gauge how much danger she might bring with her, and how much danger might already be following her. There were always risks in these lands: land disputes, thieves, and men who would take advantage of a vulnerable woman. Clint didn't ask her to explain. Some things he felt were better left for later. Right now she needed safety, and he had the means to provide it. Over the next few hours, Clint showed Maggie around the ranch. She learned where the water came from, where the cattle were kept, and how to avoid the prickly cactus and thorny bushes that could easily tear clothes or skin. She asked questions about the work, eager to help in any way she could, even with her condition. Clint watched her closely, impressed by her resilience. She wasn't pretending to be stronger than she was. She was simply doing what needed to be done. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Clint returned to his chores, feeling a strange sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Having Maggie here wasn't part of his routine, but it felt right. He realized that protecting her, helping her, was no longer just a responsibility. It was something that mattered deeply. He couldn't explain it, but he felt that if anything happened to her, it would leave a hole in his life he didn't want to face. That evening, after the work was done, they sat together outside, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky turned deep purple and gold, the air cooling against their skin. Maggie was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. Then she turned to Clint and said something that made his heart skip. "I'm going to have your baby," she said softly. I know you don't know me, but I feel like you're the only one I can trust." Clint swallowed hard. He had expected her to be scared, to plead, to ask for protection, but he hadn't expected these words. They were bold, even shocking, and yet they carried an honesty he couldn't ignore. He didn't know what the future held or how their lives would change, but he felt a commitment stirring inside him. Maggie had put herself in his hands, and he would do everything he could to keep her safe. The first night at the ranch was quiet. The wind rustled through the grass, and the distant howl of a coyote echoed across the plains. Clint kept watch for a while, walking the edges of the property, making sure everything was secure. Maggie had a simple bed in the corner of the main house, a place where she could rest without fear. Clint knew the journey ahead would not be easy. Trouble had a way of finding people, especially those who were alone or in need. But for the first time in a long time, Clint felt a sense of purpose that went beyond the land and the cattle. He had someone to protect, someone to fight for, someone whose life now mattered deeply to him. In the days that followed, Clint and Maggie began to settle into a routine. He taught her the small ways of ranch life, how to check on the cattle, how to carry water without spilling it, how to move quietly so as not to startle the animals. She learned quickly, her determination and intelligence shining through. Clint found himself talking to her more than he had talked to anyone in years, sharing stories of his past, of losses and mistakes, of days when the land felt cruel and lonely. Maggie listened, asking questions, and sometimes offering insights that made him think in ways he hadn't before. Yet even as they settled into this fragile new life, Clint couldn't ignore the dangers lurking in the world beyond the ranch. There were people who would take advantage of a woman alone, men who would see weakness and try to exploit it. And Maggie's past, whatever it was a mystery, one that he knew could catch up with him at any time. He kept watch, always alert, always prepared. The plains might be beautiful, but they were also unforgiving. And so, life on the ranch continued. Sunrise to sunset, work and care, quiet conversations under the stars, and the growing awareness that their lives were now entwined in a way that neither of them could have expected. Clint knew that the days ahead would test both of them, but for now, as the stars blinked into existence above the wide-open sky, there was a fragile peace. Maggie had found shelter, and Clint had found a reason to fight for more than just survival. It was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood, but both felt deeply. A story of courage, trust, and the chance to build a life against all odds in the wild, untamed West. The days following Maggie's arrival passed with a quiet rhythm, but Clint knew the peace was fragile. Life on the ranch was never truly safe. The wind carried secrets, and the wide plains allowed trouble to travel quickly if someone wanted it to. Clint had seen enough in his years to understand that, and now, with Maggie and her unborn child depending on him, his sense of responsibility had doubled. Maggie adjusted quickly to the routines of ranch life. She learned how to carry water from the well without spilling it, how to mend torn fences with nails and wire, and how to move quietly across the fields so as not to startle the cattle. Despite her condition, she worked hard. Clint watched her closely, impressed by her determination. She was strong in ways that didn't rely on brute force. Her courage was quiet, steady, and unshakable. Even in the early mornings when the air was sharp and cold, she would rise before the sun, helping with chores without complaint. Clint felt a mix of admiration and concern. He respected her strength, but he could see that the work was not easy for her. The pregnancy made every movement more tiring, every task more dangerous. And yet, Maggie refused to be a burden. She wanted to contribute, to prove she could survive on her own terms. Clint found himself silently promising that he would protect her from more than just the work. It was the outside world that worried him most. It wasn't long before that outside world began to intrude. One morning, Clint noticed tracks near the edge of his property, fresh, heavy, and deliberate. He crouched, examining the soil. The footprints were from several men, boots worn and dirty. They hadn't come for water or food. Clint's instincts told him that they were scouting, possibly plotting something against him. He traced the tracks further, noting the direction they came from. The nearby landowner, a greedy man named Harlan Briggs, had always eyed Clint's property with envy. Briggs had little concern for anyone else's life, and his men were known to intimidate neighbors and steal cattle. Clint felt a tightening in his chest. Maggie needed protection, and he knew he could not let her face these threats alone. Maggie noticed Clint's seriousness that evening as they worked together to mend a fence. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern in her voice. Clint hesitated. He wanted to shield her from worry, but he also knew she deserved the truth. "There's trouble nearby," he said. "Men have been scouting around. I think Briggs is planning something. He wants the ranch." Maggie's eyes widened, but she did not shrink back. Instead, she nodded, determination shining through her fear. "Then we fight," she said simply. "I'll help however I can." Clint studied her. She was small, and her pregnancy made her vulnerable. Yet her words carried a conviction that surprised him. He realized that her courage was not the kind born of recklessness. It came from the necessity, from the will to survive. He felt a swell of respect for her. Protecting her would not be easy, but he knew he could not let anyone harm her. The tension in the air grew over the next few days. Clint noticed more signs of interference, a broken fence post that hadn't been there the day before, missing tools from the shed, and distant voices at night that vanished as soon as he approached. The world beyond the ranch was pressing in, relentless and dangerous. Clint made adjustments to their routines, patrolling the land more frequently, keeping watch for strangers, and fortifying the areas around the house. Maggie helped where she could, bringing him tools, observing the land and always staying alert. Amid the tension, the bond between them deepened. They spent quiet moments talking about their pasts. Maggie shared fragments of her life before arriving at the ranch. A small town far away, family lost to illness, and decisions she had made to protect herself and the child she carried. She did not speak of everything, but enough to make Clint understand that she was no stranger to hardship. In return, Clint spoke of the years he had spent alone, of love lost and friendships faded, of the harshness and beauty of life on the plains. Each story, each shared memory built trust between them. The simple act of conversation became a lifeline, a way to remind each other that they were not truly alone. One evening, as the sky turned a deep purple, Clint and Maggie were sitting outside, keeping watch over the ranch. The wind carried the faint scent of dust and grass, and the occasional distant howl of a coyote reminded them of the wildness surrounding them. Clint had been quiet, thinking about the tracks he had found that day. "They're getting closer," he said finally, his voice low. Maggie looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. "Then we stay ready," she replied. "We can't let them scare us away." Clint nodded, appreciating her resolve. It was one thing to survive alone, he realized, and another entirely to survive together. Their trust in each other was becoming as important as the fences and gates around the ranch. Trouble came sooner than either expected. One morning, as Clint was inspecting the cattle, he spotted 3 men moving along the ridge at the far edge of the property. They were armed, their movements purposeful, and their eyes scanning the land. Clint knew immediately. They were Briggs' men. He rode back to the house, motioning for Maggie to stay inside. The confrontation was tense. The men approached the ranch slowly, calling out, trying to intimidate Clint. He met them calmly, his presence steady and unyielding. Words were exchanged, threats made, but Clint did not flinch. He knew that any sign of weakness could cost him everything. Maggie watched from the porch, holding the edge of the railing, her heart racing. She was scared, but she did not cry out. She had learned to trust Clint, and she knew he would protect them both. Eventually the men left, but not without warning. Briggs had made his intentions clear. He wanted the land, and he would not hesitate to come back, stronger, with more men. Clint and Maggie spent the rest of the day repairing minor damage and making plans for the future. They knew this was only the beginning. The Wild West was full of dangers, and they would need courage, intelligence, and determination to survive. Despite the threats, life on the ranch continued. Clint and Maggie worked together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. They shared meals, laughed quietly at small jokes, and found comfort in the routine of work. The bond between them was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, respect, and a growing sense of family. Yet even as they settled into this fragile new life, Clint remained vigilant. He knew that threats could appear at any time, from greedy landowners, wandering outlaws, or even those from Maggie's past. And Maggie, though brave, could not fight alone. Clint had made a silent vow. He would protect her and the child, no matter what. In the evenings, as they sat together watching the sunset, Clint felt a quiet hope rising. The ranch was a hard place, filled with challenges and dangers, but it was also a place of possibility. Maggie's presence had brought new life to the land, and in turn, the land gave them both a reason to fight, to endure, and to dream of something better. The bond they were forming was not born of convenience. It was born of necessity, courage, and the shared understanding that the world outside could be cruel. But together, they had a chance to survive. The plains were wide and unforgiving, but Clint knew that as long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. The days passed, each one a mix of work, vigilance, and quiet reflection. Clint taught Maggie how to ride safely on the open plains, how to track the movements of animals and people, and how to read the weather through the color of the sky and the feel of the wind. Maggie, in turn, shared small insights, ways of seeing the world that Clint had forgotten in his years of solitary work. They grew stronger together, each day building the skills and trust they would need for the challenges ahead. And while the land remained harsh and the shadow of danger lingered, Clint and Maggie began to feel that they were not alone in the world. They had each other, and that was enough to face the coming storms, both in the plains and in life. The days grew warmer as spring edged closer, and the ranch came alive with the sound of grazing cattle and the rustle of the wind through the tall grass. Clint and Maggie had settled into a routine, but life on the plains was never truly calm. The quiet of the morning always carried a tension beneath it, a reminder that danger could arrive at any moment. Yet, amid the routine, something else was growing, an unspoken bond between them, stronger with every shared task and quiet conversation. Maggie had begun to feel the changes that pregnancy brought. Some days were harder than others. She would rise slowly, gripping the edge of the bed, her body protesting the simple act of standing, yet she refused to let it slow her down. She still carried water from the well, helped with feeding the animals, and even learned to mend broken fences. Clint often watched her in silence, admiring her determination but quietly worrying. One morning, as she lifted a heavy bucket, he moved swiftly to take it from her. "Let me help," he said gently. Maggie shook her head, a small smile on her face. "I can do it, Clint. I have to learn. I can't just rely on you." Clint hesitated, then nodded. There was no arguing with her. She had a stubborn streak, and it was one of the things he admired most. Yet, as he watched her struggle with a load of hay later that day, he reminded himself to stay vigilant. The Wild West was not forgiving, and he knew she could not survive alone. Their conversations deepened as well. Around the dinner table or while repairing fences, they would speak of the past, of losses, regrets, and the small joys that had shaped them. Maggie told Clint about her childhood, growing up in a small town where life was both hard and simple. She spoke of her parents and siblings, of laughter and quiet evenings by the fire. She avoided the darker parts of her past, but even the fragments she shared painted a picture of a life filled with courage, struggle, and resilience. Clint, in turn, spoke of his years on the ranch, of storms that had destroyed fences and barns, of neighbors lost to sickness or accident, and of the loneliness that had once defined him. Through these stories, they discovered understanding. They were two people shaped by hardship, each carrying scars, yet each capable of kindness and strength. Maggie's voice softened as she spoke about her child, expressing hopes and fears in equal measure. Clint listened quietly, his heart stirred by her honesty. He realized that protecting her was no longer a choice. It was a responsibility he welcomed. But life on the ranch was not all quiet reflection. Danger still lingered, a constant reminder of the world beyond their fences. Clint continued to notice signs that Briggs had not given up on his pursuit. One afternoon, while scouting the northern pasture, Clint spotted a group of men moving slowly along the ridge, surveying the land. He rode back quickly, urging Maggie to stay inside while he prepared for a possible confrontation. "They're back," he said quietly as he tied his horse. Maggie's hands trembled slightly, but she did not cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and nodded. "Then we face them," she said. "I won't run. Not again." Clint looked at her, amazed at her courage. She was small, and the pregnancy made her more vulnerable, but her eyes were steady. She was learning that survival depended on more than just strength. It depended on heart, determination, and trust in those you could rely on. Over the following days, Clint began to teach Maggie basic self-defense. He was careful not to overexert her, but he showed her how to use simple tools to protect herself, how to move quietly, and how to be aware of her surroundings. They practiced in the fields, under the bright sun and wide sky. Maggie proved to be a quick learner. Though she would stumble at first, she picked up each lesson with determination, never letting frustration overtake her. Amid these lessons, the bond between them continued to grow. There were quiet moments that neither spoke about directly, sharing a cup of coffee at sunrise, walking side by side through the pastures, laughing softly at small mistakes or unexpected events. Clint began to notice the small ways Maggie made the ranch feel like a home again. Her laughter had a warmth that lingered in the air. Her careful attention to the animals, the garden, and even the tools showed that she cared deeply, not just for survival, but for life itself. Yet danger was never far behind. One late afternoon, as Clint returned from checking the south pasture, he found a note pinned to the door of the barn. It was crude, written in bold letters, "Leave now or pay the price." Clint's jaw tightened. Briggs had escalated his intimidation. He tore the note down, hiding it from Maggie, knowing she did not need to see the threat yet. He felt anger rise, not just for himself, but for Maggie and the child she carried. That evening he spoke to Maggie gently about the need to be cautious. "We can't let them scare us," he said. "But we need to be ready. You have to promise me you'll stay close." Maggie nodded, her expression serious. "I trust you, Clint. I know you'll keep me safe." The next few weeks tested both of them. Clint noticed that Maggie was becoming more aware of the land, more capable in her work, and more confident in her movements. They faced small challenges together, repairing storm-damaged fences, rounding up straying cattle, and keeping watch for strangers. Each challenge strengthened their bond. Clint began to rely on her not just as someone he protected, but as a partner, someone whose intelligence, courage, and strength complemented his own. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they shared a quiet moment outside the house. The air was warm, the sky painted with deep reds and purples, and the distant hills shimmered in the fading light. Maggie rested her hand on her stomach, speaking softly. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, "but I want my child to grow up somewhere safe. Somewhere like this." Clint reached out, gently resting his hand over hers. "We'll make sure of that," he said. "No one will take this from us, not while I'm here." The weeks passed, and with each day, Maggie's belly grew, and so did her confidence. She learned to read the signs of weather, to predict storms, and to understand the patterns of the land. Clint admired her not just for her bravery, but for her growing wisdom. She had become a part of the ranch in ways that went beyond simple work. Her presence had brought life back to a place that had once been quiet and lonely. Despite the progress, Clint knew they were not yet free from danger. Briggs's threats remained, and there was always the unknown, others who might come seeking trouble, and the lingering questions of Maggie's past. Yet for the first time, Clint felt a sense of optimism. They were no longer two people merely surviving. They were building a life together, learning to trust and depend on one another in ways neither had expected. One morning as they finished their chores, Clint looked at Maggie with quiet admiration. She had been through so much already, and yet her determination and courage never wavered. He realized that protecting her was not just about keeping her safe from the outside world. It was about helping her grow, helping her feel empowered in a world that had often treated her unfairly. And Maggie, in turn, began to see Clint not just as a protector, but as someone she could rely on, someone whose quiet strength and honesty gave her hope. She had come to the ranch seeking safety, but she had found something more, a partnership, a friendship, and the beginnings of a family. As the day ended and they sat together under the wide open sky, the stars beginning to twinkle above, they both understood that life on the ranch was a constant balance between work, vigilance, and trust. Danger might be waiting, but together they could face it. The lessons they had learned, the skills they had developed, and the bond they had formed would carry them through the challenges ahead. The sun finally set, leaving the plains bathed in soft moonlight. The ranch was quiet, but the sense of purpose and hope lingered. Clint and Maggie had survived the first trials of life together, and they knew that while the path ahead might be difficult, they were stronger together. Each day, each challenge, each quiet moment brought them closer, and they both understood that the true strength of the ranch lay not in the fences or the land, but in the courage, trust, and determination of the people who called it home. And so life continued. Work, vigilance, and the quiet growth of a bond that neither Clint nor Maggie could have predicted when they first met. The plains were still wide and unforgiving, but now they faced them not alone, but together. The story of their lives was just beginning, and the chapters yet to come promised courage, struggle, and hope for the future they were building together. The morning air was crisp and still, and the ranch seemed quieter than usual. Clint had risen early, as he always did, riding out to inspect the fences and the cattle. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and the faint metallic tang of the water in the troughs. Everything appeared normal at first glance, but Clint's instincts told him otherwise. Danger was coming, and it would not wait for a perfect day. He noticed it in the subtle signs: the disturbed earth near the northern ridge, hoof prints that did not belong to his own animals, and the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off metal far in the distance. Clint's eyes narrowed. He knew that Briggs had sent more men, likely hoping to scare him off or take the ranch by force. Clint's hand rested lightly on the revolver at his hip, ready, but he kept his movements calm. Panic was the enemy. Strategy and patience were essential. Riding back to the house, Clint found Maggie tending the garden, her hands covered in soil, a soft smile on her face. The sight was almost comforting, a reminder of why he fought to protect this land and the life growing inside her. Yet he could not show her the worry in his eyes. He needed her calm, her courage. "We may have visitors today," he said quietly, his voice steady but serious. Maggie paused, brushing her hands on her apron, and looked up. "Visitors?" she asked. Clint nodded. "Briggs's men," he said. "They won't be polite. They'll try to intimidate us." Maggie's expression hardened. "Then we won't let them," she said, her voice calm but with a determination that startled Clint. He admired her bravery, but felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He knew she could not fight as he could, not with the pregnancy slowing her movements. Still, she had the courage of someone who had survived much already, and that courage gave him hope. By mid-morning, Clint had prepared for their arrival. He moved quietly through the ranch, checking locks on gates, reinforcing fences, and making sure everything was in order. Maggie assisted as best she could, carrying supplies and keeping watch, her sharp eyes scanning the distant ridges. There was a tension in the air, like the moment before a storm, and Clint felt it in his chest. He had faced threats before, but this was different. This time, it was not just his land. It was Maggie and the child she carried. The first signs of trouble appeared as shadows on the northern ridge. 3 men appeared, moving slowly and deliberately, their weapons glinting in the sunlight. Clint stayed low, observing, calculating, and preparing for action. He knew that confrontation was inevitable. Briggs wanted the ranch, and he would not hesitate to use violence to get it. The men drew closer, shouting, their voices harsh and mocking. Clint met them on the edge of the pasture, his stance firm, his revolver in hand, though not yet drawn. Maggie stayed behind, watching from the safety of the porch, her heart pounding. She knew Clint would do everything he could, but her fear for him was palpable. "Leave now, Harper," one of the men called, his voice loud and confident. "Briggs doesn't like people who get in his way." Clint's voice was calm but firm. "This land is mine, and no one will take it by threats or intimidation. Leave now, and you'll be shown mercy." The men laughed, but it was not a light-hearted sound. It was the laughter of those who believed they held the advantage. Clint knew they were testing him, measuring his resolve. He did not flinch. His eyes scanned the land, noting rocks, fences, and natural cover. If it came to it, he would use the land to his advantage. Suddenly, one of the men made a move, advancing quickly. Clint drew his revolver with precision, firing a warning shot into the ground near the man's feet. The sound echoed across the plains, and the man froze, startled. Clint's other hand rested on the rifle slung across his back, ready for any further aggression. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. She had never been this close to danger, and yet she felt a strange calm watching Clint. His confidence, his skill, and his unwavering focus were reassuring. She realized that he was not just protecting the land, he was protecting her, and that gave her courage in return. The standoff lasted for what seemed like hours, though in reality it was only minutes. Clint remained steady, using both words and subtle movements to keep the men at bay. He did not underestimate them. He had faced threats before, and he knew the smallest mistake could be costly. The men, seeing that intimidation alone would not work, grew frustrated. One of them tried to circle around, looking for a weak point. Clint anticipated the move, stepping forward with a controlled confidence that forced them back. Then, unexpectedly, the man from Maggie's past appeared on the ridge beyond Briggs's men. His presence added a new layer of danger. He had followed her, seeking control, perhaps revenge, or a way to reclaim what he believed was his. Maggie's eyes widened at the sight of him. Clint noticed immediately, realizing that the confrontation was no longer just about the ranch. It was about Maggie's safety, about her life, and the life of the child she carried. Clint's mind raced. He had to protect Maggie from both the immediate threat of Briggs' men and the unpredictable danger of her past. He gave Maggie a brief, sharp look, silently instructing her to stay low and out of sight. She obeyed, moving behind the porch railing, her heart pounding. She wanted to help, but she knew Clint's judgment was crucial. The confrontation escalated quickly. Briggs's men attempted to force their way onto the ranch, but Clint used the fences, gates, and uneven terrain to his advantage. He fired warning shots, used cover effectively, and maneuvered with precision. His experience on the plains gave him an edge. Each move was calculated, aimed not to harm unnecessarily but to protect the ranch and those within it. Maggie, watching from the safety of the porch, felt a mixture of fear and awe. She had never seen someone face danger with such focus and calm. Clint was relentless, yet careful. He was not reckless. Every step, every movement, every decision was made to ensure that no one would get hurt unnecessarily. And through it all, his mind never left her. He knew she was counting on him, and he would not fail. The sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains. The men began to realize that intimidation alone would not succeed. Clint's steady defense and strategic use of the land frustrated them. Finally, they retreated, leaving behind a warning. Briggs's message was clear. He would not give up easily, and he would return with more force if necessary. Clint knew this was only the beginning. As the dust settled, Clint rode back to the house, his body tense but his mind sharp. He checked on Maggie immediately, making sure she was unharmed. She stood, her hands gripping the railing, her eyes wide but relieved. Clint approached her, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "It's over for now," he said quietly. "They won't come back today." Maggie nodded, her relief evident. "But they'll return," she said. Clint agreed silently. He knew the Wild West was full of persistent threats, and Briggs was not a man to accept defeat easily. The evening was spent repairing minor damages, reinforcing gates, and preparing for the days ahead. Clint and Maggie worked together, their movements efficient and synchronized. There was a quiet understanding between them, an unspoken agreement that they would face whatever came together. The bond they had formed through shared work, shared danger, and shared trust was growing stronger every day. That night, as they sat outside watching the stars emerge, Clint felt a deep sense of resolve. The plains were wide and unforgiving, but they had survived today. Maggie's presence, her courage, and her trust in him had made him realize that he was fighting not just for land, but for life, hope, and the promise of a future. Maggie rested her hand on her stomach, feeling the gentle movements of the child within. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, "but I feel safer with you here." Clint took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "You're safe," he said. "I'll protect you. Always." The ranch was quiet once more, but the sense of vigilance remained. Clint knew that the challenges ahead would be greater, that the next confrontation could be more dangerous, and that every decision could have consequences. Yet as he looked at Maggie, he felt a renewed determination. Together, they were stronger, more resilient, and ready to face whatever trials awaited them. The night passed without incident, but Clint remained watchful. The Wild West had a way of testing people, of pushing them to their limits, and he knew that the true test of courage, trust, and partnership was still ahead. But for now they had survived, and that was a victory in itself. The ranch, the land, and the bond they shared had endured the storm. And as the first light of dawn touched the plains, Clint and Maggie prepared for the challenges yet to come. Their hearts and minds united, their courage strengthened by the trials they had faced together. The confrontation had tested them, but it had also shown them the power of trust, determination, and the unbreakable bond forming between them. The morning was calm, almost peaceful, but Clint knew better than to trust the quiet. The plains could change in an instant, storms could rise without warning, and trouble could appear when least expected. Still, today felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, something quiet and hopeful, like the first day of spring after a long winter. Maggie stirred in the small bed by the window, her hand resting on her stomach. She was nearing the end of her pregnancy, and the child within her moved gently, a reminder of everything Clint had been fighting to protect. Clint had spent the night pacing the house, checking the doors and windows and making sure the gates were secure. He did not sleep well, but he did not complain. His thoughts were focused on Maggie and the baby. Every sound in the night had kept him alert, and even now he remained watchful, scanning the horizon from the porch with a calm determination. Maggie rose slowly, careful with each movement, and prepared for the day. Clint noticed how tired she looked, but there was a light in her eyes that he had never seen before. It was a combination of hope, courage, and trust. She had survived so much already, and now the most important day of her life was approaching. Clint's heart swelled with a protective instinct stronger than ever before. Breakfast was quiet. The soft clatter of dishes and the occasional crackle of the fire filled the room. Neither spoke much, but the silence was comforting. Words were not needed. Clint could see the determination in Maggie's movements, and Maggie could feel the steady reassurance in Clint's calm presence. They had faced danger together, and they would face this day together as well. By mid-morning, the first signs that the day was changing arrived. Maggie felt the first strong contractions, sudden and unmistakable. Her hand gripped the edge of the table as she looked at Clint, fear and determination mingling in her eyes. Clint moved quickly, his hand steady and reassuring. "It's time," he said quietly, guiding her to the small bed prepared for the birth. "We'll do this together. You're safe here." Maggie nodded, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had trusted Clint through so many dangers, and now she trusted him with the life of her child. Clint adjusted the room, making sure everything they might need was within reach, from clean cloths to warm water. He had faced storms and threats, but this was different. Life depended on his care and calm. Hours passed slowly. Clint remained by Maggie's side, supporting her, encouraging her, and keeping her calm. He marveled at her courage. Each contraction was strong, painful, and exhausting, yet Maggie faced it with determination. Her voice was steady when she spoke, offering small words of reassurance to Clint as well. "We can do this," she said. "We'll get through this together." Clint's admiration for her grew with every passing moment. She was strong, brave, and resilient. He held her hand firmly, feeling the tiny movements of the child within her, and whispered words of encouragement. "You're doing perfectly," he said. "Keep going. You're almost there." The afternoon sun rose higher, casting warm light into the room. Outside, the wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the open plains. Clint could hear the soft calls of birds and the distant lowing of cattle. It was a reminder that life went on, even as the most important moment of their lives unfolded within the small house. Finally, after hours of effort and determination, a cry filled the room, a tiny, strong sound that made Clint's eyes mist over. Maggie collapsed back onto the bed, exhausted but smiling through tears. Clint carefully lifted the child into his arms, feeling the warmth and fragile strength of new life. The baby was healthy, alert, and alive. Clint looked at Maggie, his heart full. "We did it," he said softly. "You did it." Maggie reached out, touching the child gently, her expression a mixture of relief, joy, and awe. "Our child," she whispered. Clint nodded, his eyes fixed on the tiny, perfect life in his hands. The ranch, the plains, and the struggles of the past weeks suddenly seemed distant. This moment, the life before them, was everything that mattered. The days following the birth were filled with quiet routines, careful care, and small celebrations of new life. Clint and Maggie worked together to care for the baby, sharing duties and supporting one another. The child's cries, once a sound that could have caused panic, became a source of joy, filling the ranch with warmth and laughter. Clint found himself smiling more than he had in years, and Maggie's calm confidence in caring for her child gave him hope for the future. Outside, the ranch began to feel alive in a new way. The fences were repaired, the cattle moved freely, and the land itself seemed to welcome the new beginning. Clint spent hours working the fields, often pausing to watch Maggie with the baby, feeling a quiet sense of pride and gratitude. The danger from Briggs and other threats remained in the back of his mind, but it no longer overshadowed the joy of this new life. One afternoon, Clint rode out to inspect the fences and fields, the baby safely in Maggie's care. As he rode, he noticed movement on the horizon, 3 figures approaching. His hand instinctively went to his revolver, but he stayed calm. It was likely Briggs' men still testing, still threatening. Clint's experience had taught him that fear was a weapon, but calm, careful action was stronger. When the men approached, Clint stood his ground. His voice was firm. "You're not welcome here. Leave or you'll face the consequences." The men hesitated, sizing him up, but Clint's confidence and presence were unyielding. After a tense moment, they retreated, leaving behind only the knowledge that they had been challenged. Clint watched them go, then turned back to the ranch, feeling a deep sense of relief. They had survived the threat, and now nothing could take away the joy and safety of their home. Maggie came out to meet him, holding the baby in her arms. "Everything's fine," she said softly. "You were right to stay calm." Clint smiled, relief and pride mixing in his expression. "We're safe," he said. "For now, we're safe." Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The days were filled with caring for the baby, tending the land, and rebuilding fences and barns. Each day was a balance of work and rest, vigilance and trust. Clint and Maggie had grown closer, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced and the joy of the new life they had brought into the world. They spent quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sunset, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Clint would often hold the baby, feeling the tiny fingers curl around his own, and he would look at Maggie, realizing how much they had both changed. Their lives, once defined by struggle and isolation, were now filled with hope, love, and the promise of tomorrow. Briggs's threat had not disappeared completely, but Clint felt confident that he could face any future challenges. He had Maggie and their child by his side, and that gave him strength he had never known. The ranch was more than land. It was a home, a place of safety, and a symbol of resilience. As the weeks turned into months, Clint and Maggie found joy in the small moments, the first laugh of their child, the way the baby reached for their hands, and the quiet mornings when the plains stretched endlessly before them. They had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty together, and now they were building a life rooted in trust, courage, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Maggie rested her head on Clint's shoulder, watching the baby sleep peacefully in a small crib by the window. "We did it," she whispered. Clint kissed her forehead gently. "Yes," he said. "Together, we did it." The ranch was quiet, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The storms had passed, the dangers had been faced, and the future was theirs to shape. Clint looked out over the plains, the wind ruffling his hair, and felt a deep sense of peace. They had survived the trials of the Wild West, faced danger and found love and hope where it seemed impossible. And as the stars appeared one by one in the night sky, Clint, Maggie, and their child rested together, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them united, with courage, trust, and a bond stronger than any threat the world could bring. The ranch was more than just land. It was a home, a place of new beginnings, and a testament to the strength of those who dared to hope and fight for a life worth living. The story of Clint and Maggie, of survival, courage, and new life, had reached a moment of peace. But the plains, wild and wide, would always demand vigilance and bravery. Together, they were ready. Together, they had found a home.